After a really impressive showing in his last game, Chris Boucher has spoken out on the inconsistent minutes he's been getting to start off this season, so we'll discuss that, including Darko Rajakovic having a new favorite in terms of closing games and what it means for the Toronto Raptors team going forward. Is it something I'm pretty encouraged by? So lots of stuff to break down in this video. Without further ado, let's jump into the first topic of discussion. The first thing we're taking a look at is Chris Boucher speaking out on minutes. Now, Chris Boucher has been a guy that's been on the Toronto Raptors for the last few seasons now at this point, and he's established himself as a true rotation piece for this Toronto Raptors team. He's a guy that can come in, be a spark plug off the bench, can knock down a few threes, play some strong defense, finish at the rim. He's long, he's wiry, and he's a guy that's become, being a Canadian, a bit of a fan favorite. Some people are high and low on him at times, but I'm a big fan of Chris Boucher. And to start off this year, you've heard me say it on these podcasts. He's not a dude, in my opinion, that should be getting coach's decision DNPs. And his performance last night against the Dallas Mavericks indicates that. I mean, he's a guy that has a track record as a guy. Sure, he's a bit inconsistent. Sure, if he's not rolling, he's not hitting threes, he's not a guy that you might want to rely upon in terms of centering your offense around or anything along those lines, but he can come into games and completely change the shape of what's going on. We've seen it happen game after game and over the course of his career. He's just kind of a perfect big man spark plug, and basically, he's been getting a lot of DNPs and then a bit of minutes here. Precious has dealt with some injuries, so it's been unpredictable the minutes Chris Boucher has been getting to start off the season, and he discussed this following last night's matchup, after he played really well against the Dallas Mavericks, basically saying, I'm not going to lie to you, it's still frustrating, but I also know that there's always something I can learn from it, and I'm trying to come back to be better than I was. Chris Boucher, on managing his bumpy minutes so far this year, had 10 points in 15 minutes against the Dallas Mavericks, and it makes sense. Chris Boucher is a guy that has been benched at times over the course of his career. It's not like Nurse didn't have games last season where Boucher didn't see the floor. I mean, especially around December time last season, Chris Boucher was in a very, very well-regarded slump. A lot of people were bringing it up, saying he's not an NBA player and those things. Bounced out of it, once he had some more opportunities later in the year, got back to his natural self. But Boucher this season, the minutes definitely play a part in it, in terms of you're not getting a lot of run, you're going to be less consistent, and it's an extremely small sample size as is with the first few games of the season right here. But Boucher to start this year in 6 games, only averaging 7 points, 5 rebounds, including the big game he had last night. But the brutal number in this aspect has been the 16% from the three-point line. And he hit his first 3, missed his first 6 attempts on the season last night. So Boucher obviously is a floor spacer. That's a part of his value off the bench. The slingshot shot with the high release can sort of take some other teams off guard a little bit, and he can knock down those shots pretty solidly. His percentages over the course of his career, again, have been very wild. But, Boucher is a guy that is in there for a bit of offense, is in there for a bit of defense, but regardless of how his shots are going, regardless of how things are rolling with Chris Boucher, he's proven that he'll always sort of end up getting back on track. And we saw it in this game here tonight. So, yes, it's only 6 games. Yes, there's been games where Chris Boucher has had a coach's decision DNP, but did not play in the game, so 0 minutes for the game. But I personally, regardless of how he's playing, regardless of how bad the three-point percentages look, I think Chris Boucher at least deserves some minutes every single game, deserves some opportunities. And we'll talk about Jakob Poeltl's minutes, especially in the second half of this video, because we have a new closer for the Toronto Raptors. But Boucher should probably be eating in a little bit of those Poeltl minutes. Matchup dependent. Again, last night, the Dallas Mavericks did not have Lively. They did not have Maxi Kleber, even though Kleber, I think, is a good matchup for Chris Boucher, but no, not their true regular starting center. Dwight Powell was running the 5, so the Raptors could benefit to run a little bit small ball. I mean, we've seen Powell for Team Canada get cooked in the paint at times, so Boucher's obviously a small ball center, but more of a 4 in the NBA, so, it's going to be matchup dependent, but I think regardless, at least give Chris Boucher 5 minutes tonight. Give him a stint out there with the roster. See how he's doing in the first half. If he's not playing well, if he's missing his shots, if he's missing his assignments, sit him in the second half. But, the minutes being, from sometimes regular rotation minutes to DNPs, it is what it is. But the Raptors also have a deep roster, and that sort of leads us into the second half of this video, as the Raptors have a new closer, a new guy closing games for this team, and It's not who you think it is, because obviously the Toronto Raptors, they're going to end up closing games. And Darko has been pretty interesting about subbing people in and out in the last sort of 7 minutes of the game. Watching Nick Nurse, heck, even Dwayne Casey coach for the last decade of Toronto Raptors basketball, those two coaches generally had the philosophy of at least the last 8 minutes of the game, you want your top dogs, your top guys in there the entire time. Maybe not every single night, someone's rolling, someone's firing, and it could be malleable a little bit, especially with Nick Nurse. But Darko Rajakovic has had the interesting philosophy of, hey, Scotty Barnes is cooking. He's getting a little bit tired, taking too much of the load in the fourth quarter. We'll sub him out for a minute or so with 3 minutes left. And regardless of what you might think of that, if you think it's smart, if it's not, it keeps the players refreshed and it leads to some different rotations. But one guy that's been a staple on the basketball court for the past couple games that he's been out there available has been Otto Porter Jr. He's been closing regulation games in place of Jakob Poeltl for the second straight game. And personally, I think this makes a lot of sense because I've been high on the Jakob Poeltl acquisition. Again, the first round pick, said it from the jump. You guys kind of roasted me for saying it was too risky for an unprotected protected top 6 pick, but limited protections on those. And then a lot of people said, what are you even saying you're positive on the Jakob Poeltl trade for? Because, we looked really bad at the start of the year. So Raptors fans have gone 2 directions with this, but Poeltl is a very valuable piece in guarding the big men, being a mobile defender, protecting that paint. We need a proper, legitimate center over the course of the seasons in order to really hold up during the regular season. I mean, Pascal Siakam can't play center. He's a proper 4. We're too small with Precious Achiuwa, Chris Boucher, if we're going to be fighting up against the Joel Embiids, the Nikola Jokic's of the world. Even if OG Anunoby is capable, night in, night out, we don't want OG's, Pascal's, Chris Boucher's, Precious's guarding centers for the full 48 minutes. Jakob Poeltl is valuable there. He gets a lot of rebounds, but he's a He's a bad free throw shooter. I won't say horrific, but he's a bad free throw shooter. He doesn't really space the floor. So at the end of games, when he gets fouled, we've seen it time and time again. In the second half of last year, preseason, the start of this season, Poeltl's getting these clutch free throws, and he's just not reliable in that space. So a lot of people have said, hey, maybe we revert back to the pre-Jakob Poeltl starting lineup, obviously with Schroeder in there now instead of Fred, and then insert Gary Trent Jr. into the game. And I think that makes sense, but Gary has been a bit inconsistent this season. But one guy, even though his stats aren't that eye-popping, his game certainly has been in terms of the calmness he brings out there on the court. He's won a championship just in the past 2 seasons as a starting caliber player. I mean, he sort of had a similar role with the Golden State Warriors, Otto Porter Jr., being a starter or being a closer for that team, even though Gary Payton and a few of those guys, Jordan Poole, were the more explosive talents, if that sort of makes sense. But Otto Porter Jr. has been getting that extra run. And yes, his stats are only 4 points per game, only played 3 games. In the start of the year. We were talking about DMPs for Otto Porter Jr., but apparently it's injuries and health-related stuff. But basically, 4 points, 3 rebounds, not too worried about that. But he's efficient from behind the three-point line, shooting 40% from the three-point arc. Again, a very small sample size, but along lines of his career averages, and plays great defense. He doesn't do anything too just out of pocket, especially during clutch moments. He makes the right reads. He makes the right passes. He's a lot bigger dude, just watching him out there on the court, getting more of a sample size of him this season. He can guard. He can take some hits and stay on, in his defensive stance and move around laterally quick. Otto Porter Jr. is a great defender, a great three-point shooter, and does everything right. He complements the Pascals, the Scotty Barnes, the OG Anunobys, the Dennis Schroeders of the world very well. And while we don't want OG Anunoby guarding 5s, from quarters 3 to, even the start of the 4th, we don't want him banging down low the entire game. OG is fully capable of matching up against 90% of the 5s. Heck, especially if we have some length out there on the court with Pascal, Scotty, and these types of dudes. We're capable of running that small ball unit for small stretches, but not for the entire game. So Poeltl being the starter and then maybe closing with that small ball unit, so we're not worried about free throws, not worried about that lateral quickness, the 3s, and all things along those lines. And OG can hold his own for at least a few minutes in each game. I like the strategy from Darko Rajakovic. Darko's had a really coming out party over the last few games, making some really nice adjustments, nice changes. The team is still getting used to the offense, but I'm really encouraged from what I've seen from the Toronto Raptors. But let me know what you guys think about this Toronto Raptors squad. You guys are the best for making this far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Very close to 30,000 subscribers, so it would mean the world to me if you hit that button. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.